So let's just say sleep, anxiety, mood, stress. We'll just talk about it. It affects the entire body, right? So we're talking about these things is like headache, dizziness, ADHD, anxiety, irritability, panic disorders, even grinding of the teeth, heart rates, blood sugar imbalances, arrhythmias, digestive disorders like irritable bowel, weight gain, especially around your hips and your stomach, unexplained weight gain. I get a lot of people that go, I work out all the time, I eat right, but I can't get rid of this weight. Well, it's stress. Hey everybody, my name is Josh Rimany. I am the pharmacist that de-prescribes drugs by giving people health and wellness tips, tricks, hacks to moving their health from maybe not so good to vibrant. Follow along if you're ready to go beyond the pills.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Beyond the Pills podcast. And we are here with our wonderful host, Josh Rimany. My name is Hector Santiesteban. I'm a producer here, and I'm going to slowly slip away into the background. But we got an exciting topic, maybe a very pertinent topic for people today, Josh. But before we get into that, how are you, my man? How are things back in your world?
I'm good. Couldn't be better, actually. Just trying to launch this podcast and get things going with these, with all these pertinent topics. So it's been good. Everything's good. How are you?
What's interesting is that right now it seems that what people are experiencing in their own personal lives seems to be being played out at a larger scale, right? So over the last couple of years, there's this huge, global events, right? And it seems that even on a microcosm level, people are experiencing heightened levels of craziness just in their world, right? I mean, I think that a lot of us can say that we've dealt with more stuff in the last 3 years than, I don't know, pick a time period before. But this idea of stress and dealing with all of these different things, I think is something that not everybody was prepared for.
Which is part of the reason why I think I've devoted a ton of my personal life as well as professional dealing with that one word, stress. I always tell people it's funny is like when we thought that we are at the highest level of our stresses, and then COVID hit. And it's like that level of stress that we didn't think we could obtain just got worse, right? It was like, it's kind of like when you go and somebody says, raise your hand as high as it'll go, right? As high as you could possibly get it. And then you go, well, raise it a little bit more. And everybody can raise it a little bit more, right? And so I think that's kind of what's happened with stress, and just looking at stress from the standpoint of where we are right now in the chronicity of our stress. Because I think when COVID came along, it was an acute stressor. It happened really quickly, and everybody had to adapt. And there's an adaptation piece to stress. But now that we're talking about it here in 2023, it's, well, what are the downstream effects of that chronic component that I think are really the most detrimental to our health?
Is the biggest problem perhaps that people don't realize the effects of stress? It seems that the pandemic caused people to go one of two routes. They either went, this positive route, and they started working out and meditating and reading and journaling, and then the other route, they went the other way. And so, how do you kind of reconcile that, or what are the kind of the biggest reasons that we're in this mess?
To me, the way I look at it, it always boils down to like my pillars of health, right? And one of those pillars is emotional well-being. And so we all know of that, right? We don't know how to really wrap ourselves around this thing called our mind in our emotional states. The thing we got to remember is our mind and our body are really connected. So whatever happens on our mind downstreams to our body, and whatever happens to our body can go upstream to our mind. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But for me, it's really like stress is the root cause of almost all chronic conditions, and the number one reason why we go to the doctor when you look at all the downstream effects of stress. But 3% of people generally go about seeking management help with that one component. So I think it's more of there's an awareness piece, I think, for sure, because we all know of it. But when we know what we can do about it, I think that's what really helps. I think people don't realize all the things we can do to manage our stress and become more resilient to this thing called stress is really the big part of it.
Do people go in saying, "Hey, I have stress. I need something for this," or is it coming out in some other problem where it's, I have headaches or back pain or I don't know, all these other kind of external issues where you mentioned that stress is actually the root problem. Are people even aware of it?
When I look at the functional side of things, right? Functional medicine is really near and dear to my heart, really explores that root cause. So when I said the root cause of chronic conditions are stress, but what happens is people generally come to the doctor or seek the problem of what I call what the downstream effect of that is. So let's just say sleep, anxiety, mood, stress. We'll just talk about it. It affects the entire body, right? So we're talking about these things is like headache, dizziness, ADHD, anxiety, irritability, panic disorders, even grinding of the teeth, heart rates, blood sugar imbalances, arrhythmias, digestive disorders like irritable bowel, weight gain, especially around your hips and your stomach, unexplained weight gain. I get a lot of people that go, I work out all the time, I eat right, but I can't get rid of this weight. Well, it's stress. Decreased libido, muscle tension, fibromyalgia, complex pain syndromes. All of this has to do with that one word, because that downstream effect is what's causing all those problems. And I think that's where people come to the doctor or the pharmacy is like, I can't sleep. What do I do? And I always tell people, it's funny, that's the one word. Like I was like, if somebody comes in to help sleep, I always go to the opposite. I say, well, how's your stress level? Because they go for the sleep, but they're not looking at why the sleep is the problem. One of the 4 key imbalances of stress is insomnia.
What are some other things that you mentioned? Weight loss, insomnia, irritable bowel syndrome. Are there any other kind of, I don't know, maybe hallmark symptoms that someone says, I'm experiencing this, and you're like, well, it's probably stress?
Well, there's really 4 key stressors on the body from the word stress or stress imbalance. One is blood sugar control. So that's where the weight gain can come in, blood sugar imbalances, fatigue issues, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia. There's a direct correlation of stress response and blood sugar. Mental and emotional. So that's where anxiety, depression, foggy brain, insomnia is the third. And then the last one, which I don't think people correlate with the stress piece, is inflammation and what that does to the body. The immune system crashes. We have it lights up pain receptors. So inflammation is a key component to the downstream effects. You think of anything in that pain space or what wreaks havoc on the body is inflammation. And so does stress cause inflammation or does inflammation cause stress? We can talk about that for hours, but the key is it does cause inflammation on the body, and it can hack and wreak havoc on all sorts of things. So those are kind of like the 4 key things. And then you can link those 4 key stressors to those downstream things that are causing everybody to have those issues.
Are there tools out there that someone can go and take to see where they stand or see if they're in maybe a critical place?
Because I think the first piece is awareness, right? Whenever somebody's looking at their health score or their health, so you can actually predict an event, a major physiological condition or event within 2 years. There's this thing called the Holmes-Ray Stress Inventory Scale. I think you go to stress.org and you can do the assessment. So basically there's good stress too. When you move into a new house, per se, that could be a good stress. It's called eustress, but it's still stress on the body. So we can't just say negative stress. It's just an accumulated score. So you can take an assessment. And so, major death in the family, divorce, losing something major, a major issue in your health, those are higher scored. But if you score on this assessment of 300 or higher, and we usually take the assessment when people go through our programs because we want to see a baseline, right? Is if they're hitting 300 or more, you can actually predict the likelihood of them having a major stressful health event in their life within 2 years is highly likely. So if we don't handle ourselves, because that's the big piece here, the stressor is really not the issue. Stresses happen all the time. It's how the body and our mind, how we handle the stress, how we perceive that stress, which causes that downstream effects.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you mentioned that there's a lot of connection between body and mind. The mind is interpreting these external stressors, right? You know, kids or family or COVID or the news or Twitter or whatever it is. But then the body is, it's actually coming out in the body. Can you talk about what some of those processes are, or what's happening there? Because I don't think people are connecting necessarily the outside to what's happening inside.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what a stressor is, right? I look at it from the standpoint of it's our perception of the stress that makes the difference. So the stress itself. So I always make the analogy of, let's say you're outside doing yard work and you see a garden hose, but you perceive it as a snake. Automatically, your perception of your danger is very different than if it's a garden hose, right? It's not a snake, but if your mind perceives it just for that split second, just imagine yourself like walking, their leaves are covered, and all of a sudden that little piece of garden hose looked just like a snake, right? And if you're living in places where there's venomous snakes, it's even worse, right? But if your body perceives it or your mind perceives that as a stressful thing, up to 14 biochemical reactions are going on within split second. So the thing called a HPA axis. It's called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So basically your brain, the reptilian part of your brain, we're not talking about the prefrontal cortex here. We're not talking about the human brain where we're analytical, right? Think of it when you hit, we don't have time to react when our finger touches the stove, right? So when our automatic brain or our reptilian brain takes over, and there's this signaling that goes on in the brain that goes down this axis, if you will, that goes down to the adrenal glands at the end that produces the cortisol, produces the hormones, produces the things that call that fight or flight response, right? So when the body's in fight or flight or freeze, there's these chemical, bioelectrical, all these reactions that are going on, hormonal cascades, where cortisol is the main driver of that, noradrenaline and cortisol gets released into the system. And that's where we get those imbalances of like blood sugar imbalances. Because you think about it, this is a protective mechanism. Like, we're not saying that the stress response is bad. It's been there for a long time. Our genetics haven't changed since we were running from the tigers, right? But what happens is our chronic stress that we have today is no different than the tiger shows up. You can either run, you can fight, or you can freeze. Those are kind of our adaptive skills. So if you ran from the tiger, you got away, the body's response was, okay, the stressor's gone. Now I'm going to go back to rest. So there's these two systems in our body, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system gets turned on in that fight or flight. The parasympathetic, that's more of our rest and digest. So think of it this way. You can't be in both states at the same time. This is why if you're running from the tiger, your blood glucose goes to your muscles. It gets shunted from your digestive system. It gets shunted from things because the body inherently wants to survive. Thank God we have this mechanism in place, right? It's a survival mechanism. It does its job really well. But when we're talking about chronic stress, it's very different than one acute stressor. I ran from the tiger. I got away. Now I'm going to go back to sleep and go back into regeneration mode. But what happens is all your stressors that you can think of in modern days, your brain does not know the difference between a tiger and getting stuck in traffic. You're, a dinosaur coming at you, if we were in that stage of, if we were in the dinosaur world, something coming after you, like a really specific event like that versus, being ticked off with your coworker. Those response systems is relatively the same, like the cascade. So all those stressors that happen day in and day out, what we call chronic stressors, mount up because our body really isn't designed to have stress all the time. It can actually, the triggers, people know what their triggers are, right? We know like something happens and we get triggered and we're in a stressful event. It can take up to 2 to 4 hours to calm down from a stressful event. So if you think about one after another, just put the timer on your clock. Okay, that's 4 hours. I got to figure something out, right? We don't have that adaptability space just on our own. So we have to do things to make sure that we're being more resilient, but also managing that stressor. And that's the chronicity of the problem, is our chronic stress is really causing all the issues.
You talked about two, what I would call like levers, right? In the sense that your brain can be better at perception, not recognizing that it's a hose and not a snake. And then your body can be better at being in the optimal state. Are those connected to the sympathetic and the parasympathetic? I mean, is the brain and the body connected more to one or the other, or how does that ability to recognize the perceived threat and the stressor, and then actually work through it? How do those connect alongside the systems?
I think this is where you have to treat them together, right? The mind body connection is real. Most people can understand this now, right? And so you can't have one without the other, right? And so if we treat the body, which is generally what we do in most allopathic medicine, right? Where mechanism of action of ambient, a sleep medicine, right? It's gonna do something in the body, which is in turn gonna get the brain to go to sleep, right? It's not really healthy sleep, but it's sleep. But what we didn't consider is the emotional component that's going on in the brain that causes it not to sleep. So I think there's this body mind connection, like the heart and the brain have a connection. And so when we look at what we do with the stress, it's not so much like those reactions they're involuntary, right? That's your subconscious coming up. That's that reptilian brain. That's the amygdala that's there. That's that flip, okay? That flip that happens when you touch the stove and it's really hot. You don't have a conscious control of, oh, I'm hitting something that's really warm right now. Maybe it's going to be hot. Maybe I should take my finger off. Like, no, it's out of your control, right? That's why panic attacks are really hard for people to get over, because there's no control on that component, it coming from that subconscious space. Now, what we can do is be aware of it when it comes, and then those conscious things we can do once it's been triggered is really how we can start working the brain, which then works the body, which then gets through that physiological and psychological event.
Are there signals that can point to these, right? Where someone can, you mentioned the hypothalamus, that playing a role. Is there signals or something that someone can be aware of or conscious of that can say, okay, I'm going into one of these states, or this is not an optimal state?
There's 3 stages of stress imbalance, if you will, or stress. So, and one thing you can do, when what we do in our protocols and what we do in functional medicine, is we test cortisol levels. There's salivary tests. The thing is, we, just like melatonin in our sleep circadian rhythm, we also have a cortisol rhythm. Cortisol is a hormone. It's a good hormone. We need it. We wouldn't have life without it. But if it's elevated for an extended period of time, that's when all that havoc happens, right? This is the physiological component of what we're talking about. So you have to test your stress levels throughout the day, because they become sort of a pattern, because your brain thinks about this stuff. A lot of times, the number one thing I talk to people about in their sleep space, a great example of this is, all right, do you wake up in the middle of the night like clockwork, like 2, 3 a.m.? And people say, yes, every day around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, no matter what, I'm waking up. That's your body's response to that chronic stress. The brain has already adapted into, well, I'm going to have that stress again because it's been coming every day. So I'm going to teach the brain to release that cortisol, which is the opposite of sleep and melatonin. So when you have cortisol, you're supposed to be awake and alert and running, right? Or doing something to relieve that stress. If cortisol is high, you can't sleep. That's why you wake up. So the brain is sometimes maladaptive in the place that says, well, if I'm going to get the stress at 7 in the morning, I'm going to prepare. And so that cortisol spike happens at 2 a.m. chronically, which causes you not to sleep. So we want to balance. That's the sympathetic system in overdrive. When the parasympathetic rest and digest, we've got those calming, relaxing hormones. GABA, norepinephrine, epinephrine. The epinephrine and norepinephrine are the neurotransmitter stuff, but talking about like oxytocin and all the things that are calming us down, GABA, serotonin, melatonin, let's skip and say, all right, well, what are we going to do here, right? So that's part of it. So testing cortisol is important. You can't just go to the pharmacy and grab an OTC test for cortisol. You have to kind of find someone to do that. But there's three main phases, like I said. The first phase is the alarm phase. That's when we talk about like COVID just hit, right? There's an alarm phase. That means cortisol's going up so we can start managing our space.
What does that feel like?
Increase heart rate. Think about when you get really excited about something, whether that's good or bad excited, like that fear-based piece, like you're jumping off, doing a bungee jump, or you're all that adrenaline kicks in, all that cortisol kicks in. You might have an increase in heart rate. You might feel woozy feet, that kind of fear, right? Think about that.
My palms start to sweat. And I get
sweating, just people understand what that feels like. That doesn't hang around, but the alarm phase can be a matter of weeks or months, where you tested the cortisol throughout the day and it was elevated all throughout the day. Then we start getting into the chronic problem, and phase 2 comes in, which is more of what they call the resistance phase. So you could have peaks of high cortisol, low cortisol. It's very erratic. It just becomes, because the adrenal glands, they can't pump out cortisol all the time. It's just like an engine. It's just going to wear out. So you have chronic stress over time. It becomes sort of in this resistance phase where it becomes maladaptive. It's sporadic. You could have this or that. And you see that quite common with people.
Is there any physical signs of that second stage? You mentioned that their adrenals are, sporadic, but what symptomatically, how does that actually look? Does it look or feel any different than that first stage?
In the alarm phase, think of it this way. You can keep up with the stress, right? Let's say you got a new job or something, you're running a marathon, right? You've worked and you can keep up, but you can't run a marathon all day long. There's only so many humans on the planet that can do that for like extended period of time, ultra marathoners, right? Everyone else is like, there's that acute phase. So think of it like running a long distance event. Your body can keep up, but for only so long. The second part is when you start to see that erratic piece. So that's where we're talking the chronic pieces. When I look at it, well, that's where the weight gain starts to come in over time. It can't, my gut's got all this weight. I've been eating right and exercising. Well, what happens when you get weight gain is in certain areas, especially hips and your gut, your body holds on to that energy when it's looking for stress. So there's also hormonal imbalances and things like that, but your body's anticipating stress and it needs energy. It's going to store that energy in the fat and adipose tissue, especially in the visceral fat, the stomach area. And that's where you see a lot of people that can't release that last 10 pounds because they're chronically stressed. I also think foggy brain, depression, that neurotransmitter imbalance, insomnia, that's when you start to see that space come in.
What about the third stage?
Well, that's exhaustion. That's when your body's so depleted, it just can't produce any more cortisol. These are flatliners. These are people that can't get out of bed because they've just been chronically stressed. Think of someone remember if you ever had mono when you were a kid and you're just tapped out because your resources are tapped out. You just can't function like normal people. Now there's psychological issues. Of course, we've got to put all that, disclaimers out there. It's not just the stress piece, but a lot of people that are flatline, they have a really hard time getting out of bed and just going to places because they've been chronically stressed. It happens. And then, so that can happen over a long period of time. You think about it when someone's had a very huge life events. And of course, the depression sits in and there's things of that nature. But the physiological component of that maladaptive stress response is we simply don't have the energy stores because we've been chronically stressed, and that's physiological. So I always still tell people this stress response, when we get into like phase 2 and 3, it didn't happen overnight. So it does take time for us to rewire and get that brain and get those physiological components moving. So those are kind of like the 3 stages where we can test for and we can see the cortisol patterns and see where they're at.
So Josh, we talked about what's happening in the body, but I think what a lot of people miss is what's causing it and then what they can do to actually prevent it. And, a lot of people, prior to maybe the last couple of years, the normal thing for stress, oh, you're stressed, go to the pharmacist, they'll give you a pill, bada boom, bada bam. But, like that was the stress almost was like an easy thing to deal with because you could just take a pill for it. But that's why we're here. So talk a little bit about that and talk about, some of the solutions to some of these things.
Yeah, because I think this is part of the premise of this whole podcast, and what I do like now is beyond the pills, because that pill for the ill for any of those stress things just masks the symptom, does not get anywhere near the cause, right? Sleeping pills are a great example. It dumbs your brain into sleep, has nothing to do with rewiring and getting you back into a normal sleep pattern. So those 4 key stressors we talked about: blood sugar control, mental and emotional components, insomnia, and inflammation. So the way I look at it is, what are the lifestyle and what are the, like, let's say, nutrient or supplemental things we could possibly do?
And then do genetics play a role in this too?
Yeah, we're going to do a whole deep dive on epigenetics because of that component. So one of those components is looking at epigenetics. Yes, there's a whole component of your genes and how you hold on to cortisol and how you adapt to those neurotransmitter balances, your sleep cycle, circadian rhythms. There's a whole thing on mood and behavior, insomnia, inflammation, blood sugar. All that stuff plays a role. And when we talk about that in epigenetics, it's how the lifestyle and supplements that are in your life that you can control that turn on or off those switches. More like a dimmer switch is what I like to say. It's not really an on or off switch, like I'm going to get cancer or I'm not. Like there's a dimmer component to that. And so, yes, I'm super excited that we're going to roll into one of those episodes where it's just a deep dive in genetics, because yes, it does play a role, specifically how we methylate and other types of things like that. So I've looked at my own genetics, and I know from my personal experience, I do hold on to my stress and cortisol, which has also got advantages. When we talk about genetics, we really have to talk about like what our evolutionary advantage to those genetic polymorphisms or variances in our genetics becomes, because sometimes there's not like it's wrong for you. It's just how do we adapt is specifically, and what was the result of it. So a lot of times people that hold on to their cortisol or they hold on to their stress a little bit more, that has some advantages, right? You can go longer distances. Maybe your mind's more alert and awake when it is going, but it takes me longer to calm down. So I know that mindfulness is a big thing for me. So it's one of those things where I don't look at genetics so much as bad or good. It's just what do we do with it and why it's there. Looking at it from that perspective is, all right, like how do we, now I know we have stress, what do we do with it? This is the big piece for people. From a blood sugar control, it's really looking at diet. When you're in chronic stress, your body is depleting certain nutrients, but it also needs to be balanced. If you have blood sugar imbalance because of stress, then you want to balance it more. So smaller, frequent meals, better protein balance, no crap, put the clean stuff in there. Just like we say, like it always goes back to diet and lifestyle. If you eat a cleaner, more healthier diet, but in this case, good omega-3s, clean protein in frequent amounts, because your body's craving that. You have a metabolic need to get through your stress.
There are certain people who I love, who will not be named here, who, when certain stress hits, they go for the chocolate, or they are the emotional eaters, or something, people have been deemed. Is that what is happening here? Is that?
Yeah, part of it is, so some of it, like I crave carbs when I'm stressed. I don't crave sugar. Most people don't crave savory. It's kind of like sugar or salty snacks, right? Well, one, the body wants a quick blood sugar spike, right? That's what it needs. It needs glucose to run to the muscles. So it's going to say, hey, Josh, I need those blood sugar. And then there's also that dopamine hit, right? That small hit that we get of the neurotransmitter balancing that happens with the chocolate or the craving. It's like some people go to alcohol, right? It's that initial piece that says, I need that thing to calm me down, which can happen. It's not long term. It's really short term. And that's where we get into the problem. So that's part of it. And yes, and you can always go back to genetics too. Like there's a genetic piece to that. There's a genetic predisposition when you put a few different genes together. It says you're more prone to emotional eating, and this is why. So there's a lot of that and that goes into play. Salt balance is also important. Then so sodium is really important. So a lot of times we're depleted in sodium. So increasing salt can actually help for some people when you're adding that to the thing.
You've heard people say, I feel like all through the 90s and 2000s, it was like, oh, salt's bad for you and too much sodium and whatever. So how do people navigate, or what's enough, like what's too much, what's enough, or how do they make sure that they're getting the right kinds of salt?
Well, it's all in balance, right? It's just so much more in balance. So when we're talking specifically here, right, this is where I think the DIY approach isn't always great for when we're getting down to the root cause of things, because you need a guide. You don't want to say, hey, you want to increase your salt levels, and it's funny, we've been talking a little bit, teasing genetics. There's a specific genetic predisposition where the low salt diet really works for people and some it doesn't. So it's kind of like one of those things. But from the standpoint of adrenals, let's just say the adrenals are starving because they need more cortisol to keep up with that demand. That's part of what we're talking about, from vitamin C, sometimes a little bit of extra salt. We're not overdoing it here, but you can start to see why we're craving certain things. And so magnesium's really good from a nutritional standpoint to calm the nervous system down. I think it's a really one that we overlook from the standpoint of calming space. Is magnesium's really deficient in most diets. Like 80% of people can't get enough in their diet, so I always recommend it. But from a specific perspective of calming and getting the neurotransmitter balance under control, magnesium is super important.
I remember reading somewhere not a long time ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. It seems like a long time ago, but it was weird back then. It was, and someone was saying to sprinkle Himalayan salt as soon as you wake up and chug a bunch of salt water. And I remember hearing that, thinking that is so crazy, right? But as you're saying this, it actually makes sense.
It can be. So if someone's let's say they're in this phase 2 or 3, they're in exhaustion phase, we need to get some cortisol levels up. So it's supplements, which has to do with amino acid, vitamins, botanicals, right? Those are the 3 sort of categories. Amino acids like 5-HTP. I like L-theanine. It's an amino acid that comes from green tea. I call it nature's Xanax. It's just super calming and has no side effects really. So it's very safe. And you can use it episodically for people that have like high anxiety during the day that don't want to take prescription drugs that are causing all sorts of side effects. So I love L-theanine. 5-HTP is a precursor to serotonin, melatonin pathways. So basically you're feeding the body the ability to make serotonin and melatonin, which are those calming neurotransmitters. There's something called pharma-GABA, which is just a botanical version or an amino acid version of helping the body in a relaxing space. Vitamins, methylfolate, like really getting that methylation cycle going. Vitamin C, like I said, magnesium. And then there's this whole category. I've got a whole list of them in front of me here, which is why we'll do deep dives. Things that are called adaptogens, or what the newer term is called nootropic, basically mean good things for the brain. I really like things like ashwagandha, holy basil, bacopa, hops extract, licorice root extracts, really good. Each one of these has its own mechanism, right? I think when we look at a lot of amino acids, sometimes I use them for specific phases. Like if you're low, we use this. If they're high, we use this. Phosphatidylserine, which is a vitamin or botanical, sorry, not a botanical, it's something that we make that you can supplement with that actually helps your, let's just say, metabolize out that cortisol a little bit better. So if it's high, we want to make sure it's being metabolized out because maybe we have a little bit of problem with hanging around. If it's too low, we want to boost things up because we don't want to metabolize. This is where you can get into this really kind of issue if you're self-treating all of it. Whereas there's certain things like vitamin C, magnesium, those are really important. Using things that you know of. Rhodiola is good. People have heard of valerian root, passion flower. Those are calming herbs. When you use them in teas and things like that, that can just help. They're small doses and it can really help calm you. But when we use adaptogenic blends in clinic, we're really targeting that cortisol pattern, really looking at specifically when we take them during the day. I love ashwagandha. It's one of my favorites because it kind of shows adaptogens are kind of beautiful because they're doing what they do in nature in our body, which is really kind of cool. So think of an adaptogen, it's adapting to its harsh environment. So when it's arid out and there's not enough water, it's adapting. When it's too cold or too hot, it's adapting to its environment. And when we take these things safely and with the right effects and the right quality, like ashwagandha, for example, when your cortisol is high, it's going to help it move it down. When it's low, it's going to help it move it up, which is totally amazing because the nature just gives us what we need. So when used in the right ways, botanicals can be really, really helpful. And then, of course, there's hormone balancing and things like that. We didn't get into the whole cascade of hormones and why cortisol from a hormonal perspective is just super crazy. And a quick way to do that is when you're running from the tiger. So you think of the hormone cascade, you have your survival hormones up here, fight or flight, right? That's number one. Number one importance in a human is to survive. Second one, when you move down the cascade, the hormonal cascade in the body, the biochemical cascade, you've got stress hormones first. Then you've got the thyroid or metabolic hormone second, because we got to assimilate our nutrients. And then those third ones are the sex hormones. That's how we make babies. Okay. So you got to run from the tiger before you can digest your food, before you can make babies. That's how our brains are wired. So think of it, Hector, if you're in fight or flight or stress, your metabolic hormones are going to go awry because your body's making all that stuff to keep running. And then the last thing is the sex hormones. So when we look at hormone balancing, especially in clinic, when somebody comes to me and says, I'm low testosterone, I need to fix that. I was like, we need to fix stress first because your body won't work it. It's got a hierarchy of survival. And so I really love to explain that to people because it kind of blows your mind because they go, well, I need more testosterone. I say, I'm never going to fix you if I don't address this first. So I look at the cortisol. Where are you in your stress levels? Let's manage that first because guess what? Your body wants to do what it wants to do and it's going to heal itself. So if you manage that top level space, you're going to manage the rest of it. It's just going to start working in a better way.
Yeah, well, Josh, my mind is blown here. From the simplicity of that, waterfall kind of thing, or I don't know how the hierarchy that you talked about. You can lay it over so many other things, right? Relationships, health, all that kind of stuff. This is great. So, Josh, that's quite fascinating and not necessarily surprising to hear that people go in wanting to, fix their testosterone, right? Those sex hormones, and then not realizing that there is, steps before that. What are some of those steps that you might recommend, or what are some of those things that people might be able to do to start working, getting those things in order? I was going to say get your house in order, but really, get your body and your hormones in order.
It's what we can do right now. What we can't do, right? Let's say we can't, you can always block out and eliminate certain stressors, right? You can always put blockers on, but most of the things that happen in life, you can't really block. So it's how do we control how we respond to that stress? We don't need to suffer. We don't need to be victims of our emotions. Simple, validated, scientifically proven solutions. We do a lot with what we call heart rate variability training and monitoring. So HRV, some people might have heard of that if they have an Oura Ring or a Whoop band or some of the Apple Health stuff and the sleep stuff. Talks a lot about HRV. So I'm glad it's becoming more aware, that thing called HRV, heart rate variability, mostly due to performance, but it's really the number one. Your heart rate should be variable, because what we look at in our heart is beats per minute, right? An average amount of beats over a period of time. And we say like our resting heart rate is blank, and our target heart rate for performance goes up, and the max is whatever, right? But what we don't really realize is it's the variability between beats that is a clear marker for our stress levels. And when we look at that, we actually want variability. So the variability, so the higher the number of HRV, if we're tracking it, let's say Oura Ring, the better off we are. And it's variable between people. So I can't tell you 30 is bad for you and it's good for someone else. Heart rate variability, when we're in stress and when we're out of coherence, so the body wants to be in coherence. Let's think of the opposite of stress for a little bit here, is when we're in rest and digest and we're calm, our bodies are biochemically, hormonally, electrically, all the things that are happening in our bodies is in a coherent wave pattern. Okay, it's in a coherent space. So this topic of coherence is huge right now, and how it relates to stress. So a marker of coherence is looking at your heart rate variability. So if you look at your HRV, and there's many things that affect HRV, but it's the number one way to look at how your stress levels are from the standpoint of quantitatively, right? Looking at it from a real-time perspective, but also what we can do over time. And so we teach heart rate variability training to people. It's called HeartMath, where there's 5 techniques where you can actually train the body emotionally to shift, and physiologically, from shifting from that depletive state, stressful, to a more regenerative state. So that rest and digest. So moving from sympathetic to parasympathetic, going from depleting to renewal. And so heart rate variability is huge. I recommend most people should be tracking that if they're looking to do something with stress. We kind of mandate it in our programs. Get an Oura Ring, get a Whoop band, get something that's going to look at HRV, because you'll start to see as that improves, your stress level improves, and it's a clear indicator.
And they should be looking to see it going up.
Yeah. So if it's going up, so alcohol is a great example. If you drink alcohol, even one or in excess, your HRV will tank. It'll just be flatlined. And I've seen it on my Oura Ring, on my score. So your sleep score in the Oura Ring, it shows your HRV. It's great. And so doing all these things like breath work and things of that nature, and doing things can really improve your HRV. And then it's a tool. The tool is, am I improving or not? So that's the cool tool for this component, is looking at HRV, making sure you can do something with it. But lifestyle in general, if you didn't have a tracker and you wanted to manage your stress levels in certain ways, number one thing for me is mindfulness, is just meditation, is going inward, closing your eyes. There's plenty of different ways that people can do meditation. But the fact of the matter is, if we're focused on the present moment, focused on our breath, and doing it consistently, even 5 to 10 minutes. I always say in my programs, when we're talking to people about this, and HeartMath is a version of mindfulness, it's just heart-focused breathing techniques that we can teach you. They can be done anywhere, right? 5 to 15 minutes is good, or 5 minutes is good, 10 minutes is better, 15 is great. Once a day is good, twice a day is better, 3 times a day is great. So when we're really looking to rewire the brain and redo some of these things in this stress adaptation space, mindfulness has so much data and science behind how it's improving on all those things that I just encourage everybody to have some sort of practice. It's my non-negotiable every day. So that's number one. Breath work, just breathing. All right, just take a deep belly breath through your nose. Never breathe through your mouth. Mouth breathing is awful. If you want a good book on breath, just read the book Breath by James Nestor. It's a great book. It'll change the way you breathe. But nose breathe. So breathe in through your nose, deep belly, diaphragmatic breath, right? Not from your chest, from that deep belly breath. If you breathe in for 4 and you breathe out for 8, what that does is actually gets your parasympathetic, the vagus nerve, gets stimulated and the parasympathetic system turns on. So just by breathing, we can do these restful techniques that kind of get our brain into that restful state. So breath is great. I think breath work is going to be the new yoga in the next couple of years. There'll be breath work studios everywhere. It's going to be amazing. Sleep. You need to get sleep. Sleep is the number one regenerative component thing that we can do. Your brain does not wash its cycle out, doesn't detoxify unless you're sleeping. It's like the dishwasher turns on. So sleep is really important. We're going to do a whole deep dive on sleep. I'm loving that talk because you can put years on your life just by improving your sleep. Music, relaxing, good music calms the brain waves. You can even go into frequency if you want to get to deep dive on like frequencies of certain music that's going to actually get you into a restful state. Spa music, you know that stuff. Getting rid of blue lights any way you can. Blue blockers, really important because that's kind of like teaching your brain that you're always on, like high noon all the time. So it's excitatory. I think EMFs are bad. We got to really work on that. We talked about nutrition, feed the body what it needs, be clean with that stuff, no chemicals, track and measure. That's when we're talking about heart rate variability, even heart rate. Those things can be important. I start my morning with gratitude with my girls every morning on the way to school. I think positive affirmations, we take these little things for granted, but that's super important. You can do them in the shower. You can stack these things and love and laugh more. Laughter, just the vibration of laughter creates that parasympathetic tone. So people don't realize when we laugh more, we're vibrating at a different frequency and our emotional state becomes better. When you laugh more, you live longer. So it's kind of like those little things all can really be helped. Getting out in nature can be very calming, right? When you go on vacation, you go to the mountains or the beach. Are you in a more restful state? Obviously, your stressors are gone, but just being in nature itself can be really helpful. So you could do these things by doing that simple breath work, listening to music and going for a walk. That doesn't take any skill and it's free and it certainly can calm you down. How many people just take a 10-minute break every couple hours if they're working, especially from home? Take a break from the screen and just do something for 10 minutes. It will clear your brain.
Josh, this has been fantastic. Is there anything else that we want to get on this stress episode that you think wasn't touched on today?
It really starts with the awareness. I'll go quickly, like kind of the overview. Like number one, your body does not care if it's a big stress or a little one. It's all the same. So you got to kind of understand that. Obviously, stress makes us do stupid things. How many times that's our reptilian brain. Like how many times have you said like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, right? So being aware, if you're under more stress, you're more apt to do things that you probably wouldn't do if you weren't, right? Another thing that I think is really important and what I've learned over the years is we can become numb to our stress. What does that mean? That means your new state of normal becomes that anxiety person or that person that becomes highly triggered. It's called a default mode in your brain. There's things we can do to reset that default mode, but one of those things is mindfulness and meditation. But that new norm becomes something you're used to feeling. So when we actually start improving stress levels, sometimes in the very beginning, it becomes uncomfortable for people because their normal, their comfortable was stress. Their comfortable was high wired, anxiety. It's interesting to have that concept, but just understand that as we work towards something different, it actually can become a little bit unnormal for people. We can control how we respond to stress. I think that's a real key piece to this. Not initially, but we don't need to stay in that mood. Once we realize it, it becomes easier to shift that emotional state. And the best strategy to handle stress is literally in the moment. Like doing that reversal, that quick, they call it a quick coherence technique, is just moving that body into that breath work for just 2 minutes, taking a break, going out in nature, doing something where you shifting that estate. That can really just help people in the moment. And then, of course, if you're really looking to really work on this one piece, because it's got such complexity to it, I generally recommend people seeking out someone that can help guide them in that space from a functional perspective, because that's a lot of what I do or what other people have done is really looking at this from how are we going to really work on this stuff, like learning those HeartMath techniques, finding a meditation center. Yoga practices are good. Like there's so many different things we can do to help calm the brain. And then the last one I always look at, you're either in stress or you're in rest. You can't be in both. So if you're over here, you can't be regenerating. You can't be in restful state. You can't be regenerating all the things you need. So it's just kind of like, think of it from a standpoint of you're in one or the other. You can never be in both. So you're in stress or you're not in stress. And when you're not in stress, you're in restful mode.
I think that's a great point to leave it on, guys. Go and take action, right? We're going to leave as many of the resources here in the show notes for you guys to find. And take one thing, though, and start applying it, right? Again, maybe it can seem overwhelming. Don't stress out on about it. Find something that you can do. And then go and get connected with Josh on LinkedIn. Come find us on YouTube. And then, of course, hit that follow button. And we'd love for you to share this episode with someone else who is looking to go beyond the pills. Thanks again for hanging out, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for listening to the Beyond the Pills podcast. You can find Josh on LinkedIn and Facebook at Josh Rimany and on TikTok at Beyond the Pills. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd be forever grateful if you left a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you know somebody who wants to go beyond the pills, send them this episode. If you've got any specific questions or ideas for future episodes, reach out to Josh and send him a message. Thanks again for being a part of the Beyond the Pills community. We'll see you next time.